Okay, so hi again. I'm Tanya, the Client Success Lead at ADRES. Thank you again for joining our third webinar. For those who didn't get the chance to be with us in the two previous webinars, I will start with a brief introduction about ADRES, and then we will dive into the main content. So ADRES is an international consultancy company that at the biopharma industry. Our clients are startups and companies across the globe, and we specialize in regulatory affairs, quality assurance, and CMC. Today, Roy Zaibel, our co-CEO and data integrity specialist, will talk about the risks and mitigations handling data integrity. The webinar will last about 45 minutes, followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. So feel free to write your questions in the QA section below, and Roy will address them in the end of the session. Two notes before we start. After the session, you will receive the presentation and certificate of the training directly to your emails. And the last one is that the last and fourth webinar will be postponed to November 26th. So thank you once again for being here today. Roy, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Tanya, and thank you everybody for joining. Just to make sure that it's clear, the certificate will be granted at the end of the whole series after the fourth session in 2 weeks from now for participants who watched the whole series. And so before we start today's session, we'll start with the recap of the previous sessions. In the first session, we had an introduction to data integrity, the concept in the development of pharmaceutical products and the medical devices. We talked about the data integrity principles. We explained the ALCOA plus definition, the expectations of the regulatory bodies, and the role and importance of data integrity in the quality of the product. That was the first one. And the second one, we focused on computerized system validation. We talked about the difference between a compatible system and a compliant system. We focused on the 21 CFR Part 11 requirements, and we highlighted the GAMP5 categories, which give a good method to validate your systems and practical compliance strategies. And for today's agenda, today's topic is going to focus on two aspects of maintaining data integrity. One is risks and risk assessment, and the second one is the organizational culture. So you can see on our agenda, identifying data integrity risks, regulatory expectations, and organizational culture, risk assessment methods, FMEA, process prioritization, key mitigation strategies and tools, embedding data integrity in organizational culture, and at the end, questions and answers. And we're not going to discuss a lot of new things today. The risk assessment might be new, but we are going to discuss many topics that have already been discussed in the previous sessions. And we're going to see them again today, but we're going to connect them to the issue of risks and the organizational culture, and with that, the management commitment to data integrity. And before we dive into the agenda, I just want to say that today's session might be a bit longer than the previous two. And we're going to start with screenshots I took from an FDA warning letter issued to a manufacturer of drugs in India. Warning letters are used by the FDA to reach out to companies that had already been inspected, had issues raised, and inspected again without solving those issues. And it has legal meaning, and it is going public on the FDA's website. You can access them freely with the name of the companies that received the warning letter. And I added a few links at the end of this presentation, and you can go into specific warning letters, including the one that I'm going to show now. And I really recommend reading those warning letters, because you can hear it directly from the FDA, what they are looking for and what they are concerned about in the companies that they inspect. The screenshots they took are a bit long, but it's only a small part of the warning letter. It is written very clearly, so I do want to read it. So bear with me, please. And I took just one part that describes some of the actions that they expect the company to take in order to deal with all of the issues that were raised. And you can see it as both a summary of what we discussed in the past two sessions and an introduction to today's topics. So this is again what is expected as a response to this warning letter. A comprehensive independent assessment and CAPA plan for computer system security and integrity include a report that identifies design and control vulnerabilities and appropriate remediations for each of your laboratory and manufacturing computer system. This should include, but not be limited to, a list of all hardware that includes all equipment, both standalone and network, in your laboratory and manufacturing. So already you can see here that they're dealing with risks and identifying the risks. And in here, a list of all hardware is something that you might be asked to provide in order to show that you're in control of all the hardware. The mere fact that you don't have such a list might indicate that you don't control and you don't apply all of the measures needed over your computerized systems, because a part of the risk assessment is reviewing all that you have and identifying what you need to focus on. So if you don't have such a list, you don't necessarily know all that you have, all of the systems that you have, all the processes. Identification of vulnerabilities in hardware and software, encompassing both networked and non-networked systems. This is part of what is done in validation of the systems. So this was lacking, and it caused other issues that were found in that visit. A list of all software configurations and versions, details of all user privileges and oversight responsibilities for your computerized systems. Regarding user privileges, specify user roles and associated user privileges, including the specific permissions allowed for anyone who has administrative rights, for all staff who have access to the laboratory and manufacturing computer systems, and their organizational affiliation and title. Also describe how you will ensure staff are not given administrative rights or other permissions that compromise data retention or reliability. So we discussed the importance of maintaining access to those systems. And here you need to also be able to show evidence of that control over the access to the systems. And the question of the administrative rights is something very fundamental in the questions that we need to solve over the data integrity issues. Who's going to hold the administrative rights? There has to be a segregation of roles and privileges. So this is another issue. System security provisions, including but not limited to whether unique usernames, passwords are always used and their confidentiality safeguarded. Of course, this is very straightforward. You need to have individual usernames and passwords. It continues, detailed procedures for robust use and review of audit trail data. You remember the audit trail, we talked about it quite a lot, and current status of audit trail implementation for each of your systems. So you can see they not only expect you to have an audit trail, the capability, you need to have detailed procedures for robust use and review of audit trail data. So it's not sufficient just to show that you have the audit trail, or that you review the audit trail. You have to show how you use the audit trail in order to ensure that there are no breaches to the data. Interim control measures and procedural changes for the control review and full retention of laboratory data. This is one of the fundamentals of ALCOA. In addition to interim data retention, measures also provide more comprehensive and sustainable CAPA for retention of all CGMP data. This includes provisions that address not only the need to retain batch-related data for appropriate periods, but also the long-term retention of all source data from development studies that support design, qualification, validation, and application. And the issue of source data is fundamental as well. A part of the validation of data is verifying your data according to the source data. But for that, you have to have the source data always maintained, retained, and accessible. We will talk more about source data in the next webinar. Technological improvements to increase the integration of data generated through electronic systems from standalone equipment into the LIMS network. LIMS is a laboratory system that captures all the data into one system. And here you can see that the manufacturer is expected to add electronic measures. Many times startups can do without it, but once you reach manufacturing, commercial manufacturing, you are expected to use all measures needed in order to comply with the demands. That goes also to your vendors in case you're saying to yourself, okay, this all doesn't apply to me because I don't have so many systems. I don't have a QC laboratory, but your vendors, your manufacturers, your those that give you the services for your product and for your clinical trials, they have to follow these demands as well. And you as the sponsor are responsible to assure that all the processes conducted as part of your project adhere to the demands of the regulatory bodies. So even if you don't have to do it yourself, you have to make sure that your vendors do. A lot of the work that we do for our clients is actually working with their vendors and assuring just next week, we're going to meet a CDMO, visit a CDMO in order to inspect their readiness. And part of it is going to be focused on data integrity and computerized system validation and documentation. The next point, a detailed summary of your procedural updates and associated training, including but not limited to system security control to prevent unauthorized access and ensure appropriate user role assignments, secondary review of all analysis, and other system controls. So it's about also the training. In this report, in this warning letter, they mentioned some behaviors that they encountered that show that the staff is not trained enough on the topics of data integrity and actually in this case in general conduct in laboratory. And the last 2 points, your remediated program for ensuring strict ongoing control over electronic and paper-based data to ensure that all additions, deletions, or modifications of information in your records are authorized and all data is retained. Provide your full CAPA plan and any improvement made to date. This is very broad and it discusses actually the ALCOA principles that have to be kept. Provisions for oversight from QA managers, executives, and internal auditors with appropriate IT expertise, for example, understanding of infrastructure, configuration, network requirements, strict segregation of administrative rights. And this touches the second point that we're discussing today, which is the management commitment to data integrity, in this case in the form of the provision of the needed resources and the use of relevant expertise. So that was just to show you how everything comes together. And again, it's just one small part of the that warning letter. You can read the whole warning letter later. Actually, that warning letter summarizes almost everything that we discussed in the series of webinars. So it's a good way to a good education way. And let's get more into the issue of risk management. So first, why is it important to have that risk management over data integrity? So the key risks first to data are human error, process failures, and intentional manipulation. And these key risks, the consequences are regulatory non-compliance, compromised quality of the product, delayed approvals, and reputational harm. And these are actually all of the risks that we discussed already about data integrity and why data integrity is so important. And today we're focusing on finding specific risks in your processes. But that means that it's not only about knowing where it can happen, it means that you need to have a proactive approach to your operations, and you have to continuously monitor the systems. You have to have a structured risk assessment. It can't be just things that you come across as risks and then you start dealing with them. You have to proactively look for those risks, vulnerabilities to your processes, to your systems, and you have to integrate the data integrity practices within the quality management system. That has to be a part of the quality. You have to have relevant documentation. It usually includes the data integrity policy with the management involvement in the process, and other processes that are designed specifically to ensure data integrity is kept. For example, the privileges management and the audit trail review. As in the previous sessions, just a short list of relevant guidelines. I want to just focus on the PICS guideline, which is not one that is by a regulatory body, but it is very, very good, very clear, very detailed, and it takes from the regulatory body's guidelines. So I really recommend to read the whole guideline. I think you will find it very interesting. It has some instructions for inspectors, but once you understand what inspectors are looking for, you can understand what you need to work on in your operations. And let's look at a few quotations from these guidelines. So from the FDA, data integrity is a quality management principle that requires commitment from senior management to build a culture of compliance. So the emphasis on the commitment of senior management. From the MHRA, the effort and resource applied to assure the integrity for the data should be commensurate with the risk and impact of the data integrity failure to the patient or environment. So this is about the risk assessment and the efforts that need to be in line with the risks. And from the ICHQ9, leadership is essential to establish and maintain a company-wide commitment to quality and for the performance of the pharmaceutical quality system. You can say that if the leadership doesn't see that as a crucial topic, then it will affect the whole organization and all of the operations. We talked about the primary risks, and we can get a bit more into that. We have the human error. the errors in data entry, reporting, and analysis. And you can say that the human errors are the constant risk. You can't do anything to make sure that humans are never wrong, but it is your duty as the management or as supervisors of the processes to make sure that the process calls for as less as possible errors by humans, enables the least possible errors by the operators of those systems. The second one is process failures. So that could be failures to the systems that should be covered in a good validation process. And in a validation, a part of the validation is identifying the risks. We'll see it a bit more in the next slides. And it can be the process in general, the SOP, the way that the system is handled, the way that the data is handled. So the process can assure that human errors don't occur. It's not only about making sure that process is good in the sense that it captures all the data, but if it's a good process, it will have controls that will assure that errors either don't occur or are always detected. And intentional, you can say that intentional manipulation is not something that anyone is going to investigate if they don't have a reason to investigate. A reason to investigate could be if an inspector sees a system that is completely open and that you can do whatever you want in that system without the data being captured. This could be a cause for suspicion. Even if the reason is that you simply didn't take care of that system. And more importantly, the behavior of the people they meet in the facility, in their inspection, if they don't see a culture of paying attention to data integrity, or they see any actions that seem to be not in line with the standards of scientific research, that might cause a concern for intentional manipulation. In most cases, I didn't come across a case in which I had such suspicions. So in most cases, you won't have to deal with that. But just remember that if your system, your processes, your methods, and your controls are not in place, that might cause a concern. And this is the responsibility of the management to make sure that the culture is a culture that cares about data integrity and that the systems are validated. And if there are QA managers here, you can come up to the management with concerns over the data integrity. It is a focus of the inspectors, and they do look for breaches in that. And let's talk about the assessment of the risk. So we need to assess in general, and we need to get into the details. So if we assess in general, we are talking about the processes. As an R&D company, development company, even if you're in clinical stages, you have several processes in your company. Some of them are just for R&D reasons, but some of these R&D efforts are used somehow in the development of the current product that is in clinical trials. You might find reasons for concern, safety issues still might arise. So you need to look at all of the processes and decide their risk, and you need to prioritize the processes according to the risks. Of course, prioritizing those with the highest risk based on two factors. The first is, of course, the impact on safety, and that is correct to any risk that you measure. The impact on safety is most important. Safety of the patients, of course, of those using the product. And the second one is the process complexity. And the higher the complexity, the higher the risks. And this is relevant to the complexity of the computerized systems, for example. If you have a very simple system that can be configured or doesn't do a lot with the data, then that means that it has a lower risk than a system that has a lot of configuration capabilities, and the data is being processed with over and over again. If it reminds you the categories of GAMP that we discussed in the previous session, I think it makes sense. The higher the category, the more complex the system is, the higher the risks are. So, for example, high risk can be processes involving critical clinical data or release testing. And complex processes can be manufacturing workflows with multiple stages and data inputs. And here, yeah, I want to go on to the next one, the unofficial factors. The unofficial factors, are, or you can say more soft factors of the processes that you assess are first the dependence on vendors. And here I want to tell you a story that actually has to do with all of these factors. So I'll tell you what happened, and then we can see all these factors. One of our clients had a migration of their ETMF, the ETMF, the data collected from their clinical trial. That was a very large clinical trial, multiple centers with a long duration. And they changed the vendor for their ETMF. They had to migrate a lot of data, and the migration wasn't conducted properly. We still don't know what went wrong, but the outcome was that the documents weren't organized anymore according to the correct location in the ETMF. The ETMF has a structure that is expected by the regulatory bodies, and files weren't located anymore in the places that they were supposed to. And we started reviewing all of the documents and placing them again in the correct place. Based on the risk, we started with the most critical zones of the ETMF. And here we can see that the risks were first because we were dependent on vendors. And the vendors thought that they had everything prepared for the migration, but judging from the outcome, they had a lot of gaps in the process. Gaps that if the company had to do the process themselves, they might have taken care of, but of course they didn't have the capabilities of doing that. Second, the stage of development was in a clinical trial, so that was critical data. But the costs of doing the migration to begin with in a better process were costs that at that time probably I wasn't part of the efforts at that time would have seemed too high, but eventually the expenses on the remediation of what was caused by that migration were much higher. It took months to resolve that issue. So these are factors of risk that you can't always avoid, but you need to be aware of once you work with vendors on your processes. And the stage of development means that sometimes you will decide that you can live with the risk because it's a very early stage. Even the inspectors sometimes will say, okay, we can accept that risk for this stage, but once you move to the third phase of your clinical trials, we expect you to solve that risk in a better way. And costs, again, for R&D companies, many times they can just change the systems that they use into compatible systems, but that will be very expensive. They won't be able to cover these costs, and they find other ways that are they are less convenient in their operations, but they cover the immediate need of data integrity risk. And in the future, they intend to move to newer systems. And we can discuss getting into the risk assessment in details instead of just in general. And for that, we have the FMEA. FMEA is failure mode effects analysis, and we can apply it for data integrity risk assessment. This is done for a computerized system validation, but you can do it for each process. That means that you identify how data integrity could be compromised, what are the points in which it can be compromised. For example, once you input data, once you retrieve data, once you process the data, these are the risks. You assess the consequences of each failure. Sometimes the failure is not that risky because you have another process yielding the data and you rely on that other process and you assess the risk and you see that it is acceptable. If you have a good audit trail and you review it properly, you will find most of the failures. So you need to understand the consequences. You have to have the review of the audit trail before the product is being released, for example. And the criticality ranking ranks risks based on severity, occurrence, and detection capability. Again, if you're able to detect the failure on time, that means that it might stop your processes and cost you more money, but at least you can claim that it has no effect on safety. And additional tools, if you perform a risk assessment, you can have a checklist that makes sure that you cover all of the needed aspects of data integrity and the risks. And you can have systems that have a dashboard. LIMS systems that we mentioned before can have that monitor the failures of the systems online. For example, if an audit trail is being stopped in one of the systems, you can check with your vendors. Again, if you're a startup, you probably can't afford such systems, though some of the startups that have a program development team, programmers, they might create such a dashboard as well. And again, I want to give you an example. One of the clients had a TFF test, and during that test, the screen showed an Excel file that is updated during the process, during the whole process. And while it's happening, the Excel file is accessible, and you can change the data there, and the changes to the Excel weren't captured in the system. And that caused a very big cause for a concern, caused a very big concern. And we had to add a reviewer, an oversight over that step in order to make sure that even unintentionally, the user didn't change anything. And here I want to explain that what we aim to achieve in these ongoing efforts is to put our employees, the operators of the systems, in a place where they can confidently say that no error could have been done. If any inspector raises any concerns about the data, or maybe that they manipulated the data, we want our employees be able to say two things. First, we want them to say, I would never think of performing any action that is not allowed. I'm not expected to do so, and I have no incentive to do so. No one will give me any incentives for achieving more. This is one. So that goes to the organizational culture. And the second, even if I wanted to make that change, I wouldn't have been able to do it because the system doesn't allow it or it is being captured later. If our employees are able to provide these two answers to the inspectors, you can say that you are safe in terms of data integrity. So if we want to mitigate those risks, so the key mitigation strategies for data integrity are technical controls, Access control, audit trails, encryption, again, making sure that the errors can't happen, and even if they did occur, they will be captured. System methodological review, regular compliance review of system configurations. You need to have a plan. When are you going to review each of the systems and how you're going to review it? And that is, of course, on top of change control. If you change something in the system, you have to validate it again. Organizational controls, SOPs, training, and scheduled data integrity audits. And these audits have to be, we discussed it a bit in the previous session, they have to be challenging of the systems that are being audited. You need to go to those audits, or your auditor needs to go to those systems with the goal of finding how to change data without that being captured, either by mistake or intentionally, just to make sure that these can't be performed. And I want to give you another example of a client that had a system that wasn't compatible with the 21 CFR Part 11, so you couldn't prevent access, you couldn't control the access, there was no audit trail. And what they did is they took a computer that is based on Windows as an operating system, and they put only that equipment, system, software on the computer, and they used the capabilities of Windows to restrict the access to the computer and to log every access to the computer. And since the computer is the only way to use that system and is used only for that system, that log could be used as an audit trail. And here you can see that it's not just the mitigation, it's the involvement of IT. It's not something that people that develop drugs usually know how to configure those systems. So you have to have IT involved in your processes, in your efforts to achieve data integrity compliance. And if we want to talk a bit more about the culture, we said that we need to foster a data integrity focused organizational culture. And in order to build a compliance culture, you need leadership to set data integrity as a priority, integrating it into daily operations and communications. If the operators don't see that management and QA are concerned about data integrity, they won't be concerned about it. They're going to be concerned about what they do, the scientific research that they conduct. You will find individuals that will raise alarms, raise red flags, but it won't be broad enough, and you won't find all of the difficulties that you have, or all the gaps that you have in your systems. So you need routine training, evaluations, and incentives in reinforce data integrity as a core value. The incentives are to raise concerns and to follow the SOPs, and you have to avoid incentives for successful results, successful trials. Those sort of incentives might raise the concern that the employees have a reason to modify their results. And here I just want to mention that in an audit that I performed for, again, one of our clients in their facility, they had in their computerized systems, in several computerized systems, system alerts that the users just disregarded. They just pressed cancel for all of these alerts and continued with their work. But they didn't know why these alerts appear and what is the meaning of these alerts. They just continued. They were able to perform their work, so they just continued. And IT wasn't aware of these alerts and couldn't assure that they don't mean anything problematic. But if those operators were trained on those principles and were told they are expected to raise these alerts, then IT could check it and assure that nothing is wrong with those systems. So management's role is consistent messaging and active involvement in data integrity initiatives to encourage employees to adopt compliant practices. And embedding data integrity in organizational culture. The culture has a role in compliance. Employee behavior during audits can impact inspector perceptions of data integrity. The first reason for inspectors to suspect that data is being manipulated is if they see a wrong conduct of the employees. And their concern could just be something like I mentioned. It doesn't have to be manipulation of data. Even just disregarding alerts in the system might raise a concern that there might be other gaps in the system. So management commitment should be with leadership actions, messages, and incentives directly impact data integrity adherence and employee attitudes toward compliance. We don't have much time left, and okay, but I do see that we have one question, and I want to look at least the first warning letter that I showed you. I have 3 warning letters here that are from the past year or maybe a bit more. You can see the dates. And the first one is the one that I mentioned, and the second one, I took a quotation here, so I'll read the quotation here. I'll show you this first warning letter, and just to show you how broad the issue of data integrity is there, and then I'll move on to the questions. So this here, we emphasize that as the clinical investigator, it was given to a clinical investigator in the US. It is your responsibility to ensure that studies are conducted in accordance with the investigational plan, to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of subjects, and to ensure the integrity of study data. Your failure to maintain accurate subject case histories, failure to conduct the clinical study in accordance with the protocols, and failure to provide accurate and reliable data raises significant concerns about the validity and integrity of all the data collected at your site. All the data collected at your site has concerns over it right now because of these specific failures that were spotted. So this is in a clinical trial, of course, very critical for the sponsor. And as I said, the first warning letter that I showed you, this is for a manufacturer in India. I'm not sure if you can see my screen. Let me just share it again to make sure. So in this warning letter, the first topic, the first issue is your firm's quality control unit failed to exercise its responsibility to ensure drug products manufactured are in compliance with CGMP and meet established specifications for identity, strength, quality, and purity. And here you can say, okay, it's about CGMP. But once you read into it, even the first part that I showed you was taken from here. You failed to ensure reliability of data relating to the quality of medicines produced at your facility. Failed to ensure reliability of data. The next paragraph, senior facility managers failed to exercise their authority and responsibility to ensure reliable data. You failed to assure integrity of analytical testing data. And here it goes into some horror stories about an analyst destroyed CGMP records by pouring acetic acid in a trash bin containing analytical balance. So this has to do with the source data that wasn't kept at all, as you can see. And it goes on and on and on and on. And you can see here what I showed you in the beginning. All of this is just the first topic, all about CGMP data. And then the second issue is your firm failed to ensure that laboratory records included complete data. So it's again about the data, but first it was looked at as CGMP violations, and here it's specifically data integrity violations, but it's all about the data. The third one is a bit less about the data. And then when you look at the summary, data integrity remediation is what is expected from that vendor. Your quality system does not adequately ensure the accuracy and integrity of data to support the safety, effectiveness, and quality of the drugs you manufacture. See the FDA. We acknowledge that you are using a consultant to audit your operation. This is usually they tell you, please use a professional consultant for your operations. So they are acknowledging it, but of course, it's not sufficient. In response to this letter, provide a comprehensive investigation into the extent of the inaccuracies in data records and reporting. And this is very important. It's not only to show how you're going to avoid the violations in the future. You first need to review all of the data that you already have and identify all the gaps that you have in the data. And again, it goes on, and I truly recommend going into this specific warning letter and reading it. You can learn a lot about it. And now for the Q&A. Please allow me one moment to look at the question. So the question is by Doron. Doron, thank you again. You had a good question last time as well, so thank you again for this question. Can you give examples of data integrity metrics other than audit trail that can be monitored in a real-time dashboard? So I think that it depends on your operations and your capabilities and the software that you're using, but actually every part of the validation of the systems, if you have the capability, can be monitored. So it can be failures to the software that it's an expectation of the regulatory bodies. If you're using software for GXP activity, you need to have it automatically indicate failures, but it can be any unauthorized access by IT. It can be access not controlled by QA. It can be a change to privileges. It can be trying to access the system once it's not allowed. So you could say that the audit trail, in a way, encompasses all activity. So these dashboards are just an online, on-time audit trails. And yeah, at Makuri, I hope that I pronounced the name correctly, is asking online monitoring of data integrity. So again, this, what I just mentioned, could be an online monitoring of data integrity. It's a capability that technologically is not available to usually R&D companies, but the manufacturers, if they are established, if you're not the first, second, or third client that they have to submit data to the FDA for approval, and they went through an inspection, they might have an online capability to monitor data integrity. So this is it. Again, I want to remind you that we have the last session. The last session, we're going to have a special guest that will tell us a little bit about their efforts in their company. And we're going to focus on source data verification and in general, the question of source data. And I just want to remind you that it's going to be in 2 weeks from now, not next week, but in 2 weeks. As I mentioned, next week I'm going to an audit, so I'm not going to be available. I want to remind you that you can have the links for previous sessions, and for this session, we'll have a link prepared in a day or two. If you have any questions about data integrity and what's going on in your operations, please feel free to contact me directly. And if you need any other assistance, you can either contact me or Tanya. I wish you a pleasant rest of the day and the week, and thank you very much.